my cue. All right, and we have asked Rob to share for 15 minutes or so their experience, strength, and hope with us.
I'm Rob. I'm a heroin addict, alcoholic. Sorry I was late. The dope fiend in me wanted to come up with some crazy excuse, like my grandma died again or something, I remember those days of, not showing up to work for a week and they're saying, this is the fourth time this month your grandma's died, But the truth of it is it was just an honest mistake. And, So, anyways, I grew up out west in a divorced family. Father is an alcoholic. My mother's side of the family was like pretty much Bible beaters. And, I grew up kind of not knowing which route to take. I'd go over to my dad's house, and it didn't look like his life was all that bad. And I'd go to my mother's side of the house, the side of the family, and all they would say is, like, don't turn out like your father. He's an alcoholic, all this and that. And, from a young age, it was very, it was told to me, like, watch out. You have this in your blood. It's in the family. And I didn't really know what it meant. And, eventually I got to an age, probably, 12 or 13 years old. And I remember I was so excited. It was like, it wasn't peer pressure. It was, if anything, I was really pressuring my other friends, like, let's smoke pot. Like, we need to find some of this pot and smoke it, And, I remember the very first time a friend of mine brought some over, and it was just like a little tiny bit in a bag. And the very first time I looked at it, I said, that's not enough. Like, we didn't even do it because it was like, that's not enough, And, I had an older sister. She was 4 years older than me. So, when she was in high school, she started, partying and drinking and stuff. And so I was 4 years younger and, about 8th grade, and we were real close. And so I got to follow her around everywhere. And so pretty much like since the 8th grade, I've been, out at these parties and drinking and smoking pot. And, I said, this is like this phase that I'm going through. Everybody at my age is doing this. Meanwhile, I'd go back to school, to middle school. None of the kids were doing this stuff, I remember we grew up, my sister outgrew this stuff, and grew up and had a family, got a job, all this stuff. And I just kept going. I kept rationalizing the next thing, I said, I'll never do anything but drink and smoke pot. I was probably 14, sniffing coke. 15, I'd smoke some crack. 16, I'm doing all these things. Anything that came my way. All these things that I said I'd never do. And, again, the one thing, is like heroin. I'll never do that. That's a true drug addict. And I remember the very first time, I was probably about 17. And, no resistance to it at all. It was offered to me, and I was like, yes, let's do this. And I had never seen it before. I had never seen anybody on it before. Somebody had it. I said, let's do it. I got really sick, and I loved it. And, I knew it was highly addictive. And I said, that was really great. I think, it was like a couple days later, I was like, I want to do that again. 2 weeks later, everybody evolves. I'm sure all of you can relate to this is, I started feeling sick when I didn't have it, and I didn't put two and two together. And I was like, I just remember feeling sick and be like, I think a little bit of heroin will fix this, and it didn't take long, man. Within a couple months, I never wanted to be sick. And about a month into it, started losing everything. My whole life started revolving around heroin. It was, I don't know if it was fast or slow. I guess, depends what you compare it to. But, by 18, I had lost, my job. I had lost the place where I was living. I got my truck repoed. All of these things. By 19, I was homeless. I remember like staying in hospital waiting rooms just because I didn't have any place to stay. My family didn't want me around. They loved me very much. But I was not to be trusted. You left me alone with anything of value, it was gone, And it was crazy on the way up here. I was thinking about, I think I was about 19, 20 years old. And I started having I'm pretty deep into my addiction at this point. And I was having some pains and stuff, in my growing area. And I went to the hospital and they told me, they said, you have testicular cancer. And it hit me like, holy shit, I just related to cancer is I'm gonna die. And it really affected me. And I was thinking on the way up here of I was so scared to die, yet I literally was overdosing all the time. Somehow I was so delusional that this cancer was gonna kill me. And I was not worried at all. Here I am, homeless, getting myself in really sticky situations with some pretty basically the Mexican mafia, there's just really risky situations. I'm pushing my use to the limit of almost ODing every day. And meanwhile, somehow this cancer is affecting me somehow. I care that I'm gonna die. And so I did a couple surgeries and I was going through chemotherapy. It was just the worst thing in the world, man. I almost got kicked out of the hospital because I was threatening my girlfriend at the time. As a true heroin addict, I'm going into surgery for this major cancer surgery, and I got dope for after the surgery because I knew I was going to need it. And I was threatening her to go out to the car and get it for me. She's crying, she wasn't a heroin addict, and she's crying, and the nurses are like, what's going on? And the nurses came in and said, listen, we will kick your ass out on the streets. We know you're a heroin addict, all this stuff. And so, like a true drug addict, I eventually talked her into bringing it in, and I continued to get high. And I left there after a major surgery. They just took all my organs out of me, and I'm still pushing it to the limit, almost ODing every day. There's a couple times where I did, and I just kept going that way. And I healed, and I'm a month out of surgery back homeless, right? With these open wounds in me, and I'm homeless, and I live for heroin. I wake up, what can I steal? Who can I rob? I need some money, meet the dope man, maybe he'll front me, save enough for the morning. And it was just every single day was like that. And I remember it got so bad that, the local law kind of just knew who I was, and I just couldn't do anything anymore. And, at that time, my mother was living in Las Vegas, and I, like the grown man that I was, I called and cried to mom and said, I need help, this place is infested with drugs and I just can't get out of it. And so she said, all right, well, come to Vegas and we'll put you in rehab and all this. And I went to a detox and broke out and stole a car 30 seconds later and got arrested. And, now I'm just a homeless heroin addict on the streets of Vegas, and I got, I got really involved in crime there. I got to a point I was doing, $200-300 a day, and having to come up with that money. I eventually had to start selling it and still stealing and still coming up short with money and getting in trouble with the guys that were dealing to me and all this stuff, and in and out of jail, in and out of jail. And I remember every single time going to jail for 30, 60 days and detoxing and be like, this is it. This is what I asked for. As soon as I get out of here, I'm never touching the stuff again. I'll never put my body through that again. And the COs would call my name, and say, it's time for your release. And literally all those thoughts just left my head. And what came into my head was all the drug dealers' numbers. And that was the first stop I made. Got high, back at it again. And so eventually the last time I got arrested, honestly, this was God's doing right here, is the judge finally had enough and said, you're not getting out. And I ended up doing about 2.5 years, and it was honestly exactly what I needed. I did my time in there, and I remember having this awakening in there. And I remember I woke up one day, and I'm looking around, everybody's in jumpsuits. I'm looking around, and everybody's just having a great time, right? And I was like, why is everybody so goddamn happy? And I realized, these people have, succumbed to that this is their life, And, it was at this moment where I just said, I don't want this for my life. And I knew, it was clear as day, if I continue doing what I do, this is my life if I am living. This is going to be me. I'm going to be happiest in jail. I'm going to be the most comfortable in jail, if not dead. And I made up my mind that day. And, I didn't know anything about getting sober. This was a place where I had to stay sober. So it was very easy to make that commitment and hold on to it. And I got out, and the drug addict and alcoholic in me, I said, all right, well, that was heroin. That was drugs. Drugs did all this to me. I'm just going to drink. Drinking never sent me to prison or anything. Meanwhile, it had sent me to jail tons of times and multiple DWIs and fighting and all this other chaos. And I think it was within a month I got another DWI. I was back in jail. Kept going with that. Kept drinking. I moved to New York. I have a job. I'm new to the area. One of the very first times I let myself loose here, it was about a month or two after I had moved here. I went out to a bar, blacked out, totaled my truck, on parole. And I remember the airbag went off. I'm bleeding. I cannot run because I'm completely obliterated. And I sit on the curb and I wait for the cops. And I'm thinking to myself, at this moment is when I like to think I took the first part of step one, of admitting that I'm powerless over this stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, I've been trying to do this safely or have fun with this or keep this under wraps or do this like other people for a really long time. And it has not worked out in a really long time. And I finally had subdued to I can't do this. I cannot do this. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't do this. And I went to jail that night, and I got out, and I had met a guy about a week prior to this who was in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he said, I'd like to take you to a meeting, and, this was before the DWI. I said, no, I'm good. I used to be a drug addict, but, I just drink now. It's all under control. I appreciate it, but no thanks. And so the next day after I got out of jail, I called this guy, and he took me to my first AA meeting, and I will tell you, I did. HA was not around. I got sober 10 years ago, and HA was not around at that point. So my option was AA, and I went to meetings, and I looked around, and I judged everybody, and I said, "This is not for me. You have no idea what I've been through. I've been to prison, all this stuff. I'm so much worse than you. You guys don't get me." And I kept going though, because I knew what drinking would do to me. I knew that I could not drink. And when I went to a meeting, I wouldn't drink that day, even though I sat there and judged you. And the people in the meetings were sober, which honestly, I'd never been around sober people my whole life. I grew up around addicts and alcoholics. And I stuck around long enough to where stuff started to sink in. And I started to go to the diners with people after the meetings. And I got to know these people, right? And when they were sitting in the meeting, they talk about how great life is and what these steps did for them and how happy they are now. And that wasn't me. And when I'd go out to the diner with these people and get their phone numbers and talk to them and get to know them, before they got sober, they were exactly like me. And, I started to feel that, maybe this was a place for me, and about a month in, a guy kind of appointed himself as my sponsor because, as tough and bad as I thought I was really scared to ask another guy to sponsor me or ask for help in any way. And so he appointed himself, and it was a really, really intimate thing. I'd go to his house once a week, and we'd sit down, and this guy had the all-American dream life, from my, heroin addict vision is he literally had a white picket fence outside of his house. He had 2 beautiful little boys, a really great wife, and this man, I hadn't been welcomed into a home in a really long time. At least before they didn't hide the valuables, and we went through the steps, every week we went through the book little by little, and we went through the steps, and I had my first spiritual awakening at about 6 months sober. I had just done my 5th step, and to anybody who's new and is thinking about this God piece and doesn't get it, I truly believe that's part of the journey, is questioning this and finding your own way with it. And my first spiritual experience honestly was nothing super significant. It was just the recognition of it, that it was a spiritual experience. And really all it was is I was driving down the street on my way home from work, and it was one of the first warm spring days, and I felt the sun on my skin, and I noticed that plants were blooming and that miracles in my life were happening, which to me at that point, miracles were not going to jail, going to work on time, and not drinking. That was it. But those in my life were miracles at that time. And the realization of that at that time, it was a very strong feeling, and I take that as my first spiritual experience, and since then, honestly, like a true drug addict, I want more of it. I wanted more, and I'd like to sit here and tell you that I've been seeking that for the past 10 years, but the truth of it is that a lot of the times I'll rest on my laurels, and every single year I stay sober, I learn more about myself, and a new set of struggles comes into my life, and new things to figure out comes along, and in every one of those scenarios, this program has been here for me. And like I said, I got sober in AA but heroin was a big part of my life. Heroin took me down real fast, real hard, took me to places that I never wanted to be. And, you know, when Brian started HA in this area, it was like a ray of sunshine to me to be able to come into a meeting and not like work my story around and not mention drugs or heroin. It was like I could say exactly how it was, you know, that I was addicted to heroin and I did some really shameful stuff around it, you know, and where it really took me. And, you know, I'm really grateful. I'm really, really grateful for HA and you know, and all these programs. And my true belief is that, like, I got sober in AA. I think I could have got sober in any 12-step program, you know, because I wanted it, you know, and that's what it was like for me, you know. And I sit here today, and when I look back at it, when I was a kid, this is not how I imagined my life. When I first got sober, this is not how I imagined my life, you know. At 5 years sober, this is not how I imagined my life. And I have to say, life is really great today. You know, life is really, really great today. And that just tells me that, like, God has a plan, man. You know, like, how I imagined my life, you know, with my best intentions of envisioning what my life would look like, was still pretty shitty compared to what it actually is, you know. So, you know, honestly, like, I struggle going with God's will and being like, oh, you know, I leave everything to God. That's not honestly how it works. But after I struggle enough, I do realize that, like, God has a plan for me, and it's always been a really good one. And so for everybody here tonight, you know, I hope that, you know, you stick to it and really, I guess if I could just, the one thing that for me that I truly believe is make or break it is, like, these steps, you know, getting in the book with a sponsor and working these steps, man. I know that it was my only shot. I don't know if I'd stay sober without it, but I know for sure I wouldn't be happy, you know. So with that, I'll close. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob.